A late summer afternoon in 2026 saw a fairly typical sight in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, as the Reading and Northern Railroad's T1 Class 484 number 2102 reversed yet another Rambles excursion train onto the platform. A few minutes later, though, another train reversed into the station. For some time, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had been planning a mobile museum built inside a collection of railroad baggage cars. This train, named the Keystone Express, would travel all around Pennsylvania and beyond as an educational and historical tool. The biggest artifact on display was the engine on the point. While the Railroaders Memorial Museum had hoped to have K4S Class Pacific number 1361 running in time for Union Pacific 4014's East Coast Tour in June and July of that year, they missed the mark by a month or so. Still, the Reading and Northern was more than happy to play host to the K4 and train a few months after doing the same for 4014, including a leapfrog parallel excursion out of Jim Thorpe. After touring the state of Pennsylvania, the train ventured into upstate New York with the blessing of CSX. This meant a former Pennsylvania Railroad K4 was traveling over former New York Central trackage, which reportedly sent some guy named Rodney into a conniption. Things got a little out of hand, however, when the train ventured way south of the Mason-Dixon line to the North Carolina Transportation Museum in Spencer, North Carolina. During a phone call from North Carolina Governor Josh Stein to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, Stein supposedly jokingly told Shapiro to, quote, "come get your circus train," unquote. When the Railroaders Memorial Museum started asking around for Ed Dickens' phone number with an eye towards taking 1361 to Cheyenne, Wyoming, many people in the rail preservation world recommended they get some help. Santa Fe's Super C Express trailer train service was never a runaway success, but the fact that it was happening at all made a couple of Western roads nervous, Union Pacific chief among them. By 1970, Union Pacific was looking for ways to match the Super C's Chicago to LA time by eliminating every possible delay. They modified DDA-40X locomotive number 6901 to accept fuel from an external 23C fuel tender. The tender's 23,000-gallon capacity plus the DDA-40's own 8,000-gallon tank made for a combined 31,000-gallon fuel capacity. This would be enough fuel to run non-stop from coast to coast, let alone Chicago to LA. Test runs were made on regular freight trains to see just how far the locomotive could go on one swimming pool's worth of fuel. It was quickly discovered, however, that little time was saved as the train still had to stop at least once every 12 hours to change crews. To solve this, a sleeping car was coupled behind the tender with the intention of having rested crews climb over the tender and relieve the engine crew on duty, who would climb over the tender and back into the sleeping car. Only a few test runs were done, in which it was discovered climbing over a fuel tender at nearly 80 miles per hour was just a tad hazardous for the crews. Word got back to the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, who raised quite a stink over the practice. Union Pacific began to look into rebuilding the tender to make the crossing easier. Before any changes were made, the accountants pointed out not only that dragging 81 tons of diesel fuel along with the train put a dent in fuel efficiency, but that Santa Fe was not getting very many customers for the Super C in the first place, and Uncle Pete would hold plenty of market share with their existing trailer service. 6901 was returned to pool service, the tender placed into storage, and the sleeping car eventually transferred to Amtrak. The experiment was over, but the blowback from the Union took a little longer to settle down. Pennsylvania Railroad GG1 number 4935 had a truly remarkable working life both for the Pennsylvania and Amtrak before being retired to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. Many people wish the story ended there. Project Senator, named after the cracked Pennsylvania Railroad passenger train, was an odd passion project on the part of a Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur by the name of Zane Tanner. The object was to restore a GG1 to operating condition. This was easier said than done, as most GG1s were retired because the cast truck frames were developing stress fractures. Tanner's project somehow got a hold of 4935, which may or may not have had something to do with a short romantic fling he had with a lady on the Pennsylvania Museum Commission. 4935 was taken for restoration, for which Tanner ordered the 3D printing of a new frame. This resulted in a near revolt from his employees. He instead had what he called strengtheners 3D printed in aluminum and installed to deal with the disintegrating frames. Wabtec provided a diesel motor and generator, which were used to convert 4935 internally into an ES44 diesel. The locomotive was reclassified as a DGG1. Somehow, the locomotive became Amtrak certified and pulled a handful of mainline excursions, with the pantographs down and in territory with no overhead wires. Things took an unfortunate turn during a trip from Richmond, Virginia to Washington, D.C. over the former RF&P main line, however. After the train passed through Alexandria, Virginia, and over the Potomac, every river pollution monitor downstream of the railroad bridge went off. Subsequent investigation found that the jerry-rigged internals of the DGG-1 were dumping fuel, oil, and coolant everywhere, which also exposed downright dangerous wiring work inside the locomotive. Despite numerous questionable relationships propping up his operations, Amtrak and all host railroads barred Tanner and the DGG-1 from their property and services. The environmental damage was such that, ironically, Project Senator ended with Zane Tanner being subpoenaed to testify before a United States Senate committee.